Let's talk about what it means to be a DM in May of 2026. You are supposed to prep your campaign, but not too much. You're in charge of the story, but also you aren't supposed to railroad anyone. You're the rules expert, but everyone says the rule of cool matters more than what any book says. If you've ever felt like all the GM advice or DM advice out there contradicts itself, that's because it kind of does. And the secret is this: the best dungeon masters are not people who choose one side of those contradictions and ignore the other. They are masters of the paradoxes, holding two opposite truths in their head at the same time and using both on purpose. In this episode, we're going to unpack a handful of those paradoxes, talk about how they show up at the table, and more importantly, how you can wield them instead of feeling whiplash as you bounce back and forth between the conflicting advice. Welcome back to the Shared Legends podcast, the show where we turn tabletop stories and GM headaches into tools you can bring back to your own campaigns and create your own shared legends with your players. Today's episode is titled Railroads, Sandboxes, and Other DM Paradoxes. We're going to talk about the weird, frustrating contradictions that sit at the heart of running games as a DM. You should prep and yet be ready to throw it all away. You should own the world, yet share the story. You should be fair and impartial, and yet root for the party. If you're into astrology, a DM is essentially a walking Gemini meme. You are the twins behind the screen. One part architect, one part chaos gremlin, constantly switching between them to keep your table alive. Instead of trying to solve those contradictions, we're going to treat them like dials you turn and learn to tune. By the end, you'll have concrete ways to balance prep versus improv, rules versus story, authority versus collaboration, and danger versus safety. So you can lean into paradox as a skill and not a problem. Let's first start with the paradox everybody hits first: prep versus improvisation. There's a great quote from Robbie Burns: the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. On one side, there's the advice that a good DM prepares the world, knows the villains, maps out the dungeons, and has a sense of what might happen in the next session. On the other side, you'll hear just as many people tell you, don't over prep, just make a situation, see what your players do. Or even, stop writing plots at all, you're wasting your time. The paradoxical version of this is prep like a control freak, but improv like you just don't care. That means you pour your prep into the parts that help you improvise better. Reusable tools, NPCs with clear motives, locations with strong themes, and fronts or situations instead of scripts. I typically try to ask my groups what their plan is for the next session at the end of each session to help me with prepping for that next session. I would say it's a 50-50 toss-up that those players can still manage to throw a wrench in even their intended direction. Back in the early part of my weekly campaign, the party was getting introduced to the demonic big bad for their current arc via a monologue. An imp, acting as the speaker for the demonic forces, was offering the players a chance at keeping the peace in the city and drawing just the players out to fight in a location that did not endanger the city. Mid-sentence, in typical player fashion, one of the players loosed an arrow, killing the imp. This led to an appearance by the big bad for the arc and a much more sizable challenge that nearly overwhelmed the party and incited a demonic invasion throughout the city. The players also found out that when I improv, I am far less forgiving with monster selection, and moderate to hard fights unintentionally turn into near deadly fights. But that's a topic for a whole nother episode. There's a simple way to practice this paradox. Before each session, write these 3 short sentences. Ask yourself these 3 questions with simple 1-sentence answers. What is about to happen if the players do nothing? Who wants that, and what would change it? Then list 3 toys you can use anywhere: an environmental hazard, an NPC with a strong desire, a twist connected to someone's backstory. Those are particularly effective at drawing their attention. That's your prep. Everything else is you embracing not knowing the details until the dice are in the air. You're not choosing between being a planner and an improviser. You're prepping to improvise. Now, the next one is a fun one. Is the next paradox is about authority. You are, in one sense, the god of the world. In another sense, you are just another player who serves the table. Most DM guides will tell you that you are responsible for portraying the world, making rulings, and keeping the game on track. You have the power to decide what exists, what is possible, and how the NPCs and factions respond to those things. At the same time, modern tabletop culture emphasizes collaboration. The story belongs to everyone. Players should have agency, and the campaign should adapt to their preferences and boundaries. This collaboration is the basis of my GM of Share Legends epithet. Alone, we can create great stories, but together, the tales we create at our table are legend, wait for it, dairy. If you lean too hard into being the god of the world, you end up railroading, forcing players down a single track, treating their choices as obstacles to your plot. Essentially, we're told at that point we should write a book. If you overcorrect and become purely one of the gang, the world can start to feel weightless, with no consequences, no consistent tone. Being a master of paradox here means this: you own your world, you own the world, so your players can own their story. They can own their shared legend. You are authoritative about how the world behaves, but permissive about what the heroes try to do in it. Paradoxically, the best call is to let their plan matter, but make the world push back honestly. The Baron is powerful and prepared. Their plan might work, but not cleanly. Maybe they topple him now, but his daughter inherits his network of spies, or the power vacuum leads to a civil war that changes the whole campaign. You aren't clinging to your pet plot, but you also haven't turned the world into putty that's completely molded by your players. You use your authority to keep the setting coherent and your humility to let the player choices reshape it, blow it up, destroy it. That's the sweet spot. One practical habit here: talk with your players out of character. Tools like the CATS framework, concept, aim, tone, and subject matter, are great for aligning expectations and making your authority feel like stewardship and not control. When everyone knows what game you're trying to run, you can confidently say no to the wrong kind of story, the wrong kind of plan, and yes, and to the right kind. Paradox number 3 is rules versus story. You'll hear 2 big pieces of advice in the wild: learn the rules and run them fairly. Learn the rules and run them fairly, and also don't let the rules get in the way of story. Which sounds like a contradiction until you think of it as a paradox you can manage. On the rules side, rules create shared expectations. They make outcomes feel earned. They prevent favoritism, and they let tension build honestly because the dice can surprise everyone. On the story side, which I am a huge proponent of, rigid rules can stall the flow, punish creativity, and suck the life out of cool ideas that the system didn't account for. The paradoxical stance: be a rules lawyer when it comes to understanding the system, and a rules saboteur when the system blocks fun. You learn the game well so that you know exactly when and how to bend it. In practice, it can look like this. In combat, you stick to core procedures: initiative, actions, movement, spells, and so on, because consistency makes tactical play meaningful. You're still using mechanics, but you're bending them to support the moment instead of shutting it down. Going back to a Halloween horror one-shot I ran, The players were fighting a zombie beholder that was floating above a pool that realistically one of the players couldn't reach. The group's paladin was waist deep in the water, hacking and slashing at the beholder. Initiative came to the party's barbarian Chuckles, an it-like clown with a giant hammer that was voiced like Goofy. Borderline nightmare fuel, but also one of the funniest characters I've ever had in one of my games. Now, the holder was on its, I was going to say last legs, but it was on its last eyes. And Chuckles wanted to make a running leap off the submerged paladin's shoulders in an attempt to land that final blow. I made Chuckles roll an acrobatics check, which he passed, while also rolling a nat 20 on the attack roll. One thing led to another, and the zombie beholder was splat on the pool deck. One way to get comfortable with this paradox is to separate physics rules from spotlight rules. Physics rules are the stuff that keeps the game world stable. I guess I just broke that with the example at movement, damage, resource costs. And spotlight rules are the little flexes you make to give someone a heroic beat or to keep the pacing tight. You can be strict about physics. Hit points still matter. Danger is real. While being generous with a spotlight, compressing actions into one roll, skipping trivial checks, or letting a clever idea bypass a grindy fight. I think in one of my recent sessions with the split party, the group found a book and did a insight check for like to solve a puzzle, and literally rolled a nat 20 on the clue that they got, and ended up, oh, here's the solution to the puzzle. We were running a little short on time as it was, but it was a cool moment for them because they were like, hey, we just found this out, and they looked into the puzzle room originally and saw like, ooh, this is gonna suck, but rolled successfully and ended up solving the puzzle quite well, easily. When you're both faithful to the system and willing to gently savage it in service of the table, your players start to understand and know that you're human. Giving players the Matt Mercer special is a great way to do this. Chuckles didn't even have to roll damage from his vaulting final blow on the beholder. It went straight to, how do you want to do this? The third core paradox around around the DM is the game needs to feel dangerous, but your players need to feel safe. Great stories, legends live on risk. The possibility of loss, failure, or even character death is what makes victories satisfying. If nothing bad can ever happen, then success doesn't mean much. At the same time, there are actual people sitting at your table, bringing their histories and boundaries, and they need to trust that you won't ambush them with topics that hurt or steamroll their consent. Lean too hard into danger, and you get grim, dark misery, constant character loss, and sometimes crossing lines your players weren't ready for. Lean too hard into safety, and every scene feels a little padded, predictable, like you're hitting with big, fluffy marshmallow gloves. A DM who's a master of the paradox of safety versus danger treats safety tools and consent conversations as the scaffolding that allows you to go hard on fictional danger. You use your session zero, your lines and veils, or framer like cats to see what's on the menu. Once that's clear, you can make the threats real inside those boundaries. For example, if everyone's agreed that character death is on the table, but certain topics are off limits, then you can let the dice fall where they may in a deadly encounter, while still steering away from traumatizing content that someone has flagged as a no-no. The danger to the characters is real, but you're not surprising anyone with the kind of danger they didn't sign up for. Even with this danger of two-player characters, we have to remember that our players, put themselves into their characters. They, as much as we try to have them separate themselves from it, our players become their characters. They put themselves into it. There's only so much separation you can ask for. Practically, it's helpful to frame safety as a collaboration tool, not a handbrake. When you check in after a rough session, ask, was that fight too punishing, or is that the level that you want it to be for the rest of the campaign? You're tuning the danger dial together. Once you know the dial settings, you can commit to it and trust that when you push hard right up against the dial, you're doing it with consent. You become the person who can say, this dragon might kill someone, and that's okay for our story. And also, if we're brushing up against a theme that's not fun for someone, we fade to black, we retcon, or redirect. Risk and care live side by side as a DM. The last paradox we'll hit today is one that's probably one of the bigger paradoxes that we have to embrace. Railroads, sandboxes, and everything in between. It's the title of this episode. We've all heard, don't railroad your players, let them choose where to go. Sitting right next to, give them a clear direction or they'll flail forever. You're told to build a sandbox and also to make sure there's a strong, focused story hook. Now, this paradox is especially hard to balance when milestone leveling is chosen. When the DM follows those milestones they've laid out in front of the players too strictly and doesn't allow the tracks to diverge in any way, it definitely feels like a railroad. In my weekly campaign, I've chosen milestone leveling, and the players have a group patron named the Shield Bearers of the Radiant Citadel, essentially a military force, as their origin of their adventure. Hooray for no tavern stereotype. Now, with any military type group patron, it would be very easy to set the players on rails and lead them down my single track narrative. But this was something that I didn't want to do. So I've attempted to mix that I call a structured sandbox. And I've heard the term before. In the picture on the screen, you'll see sections of a single line and then branches. Now, this was from early in Act 2, early in Chapter 2 of the campaign. There are now far more red X's. But the idea is that all the branches need to be completed before moving to the point where the branches meet. Each branch is its own 5 to 6 session adventure, and the players are free to select whichever branch they want to pursue next. And once there, they have the freedom to complete the adventure in a way of their choosing. The paradox stands here is that you create that strong, compelling path and still let the party wander off or find their way through that path in their own way. You lay tracks, but you're willing to move or rip up those tracks once the train starts rolling. The practical advice for this is create situations, not plots. You decide that the kingdom is on the brink of war, or a cult is summoning something terrible, or a frontier town sits atop an unstable magic ruin. And then you place several ways the player might interact with that situation: quests, rumors, NPCs, like doors in a hallway. From the player's perspective, they see choices: join the rebels, side with the crown, profit as mercenaries, or ignore the war entirely, because that is an option. From your perspective, you've prepped the war itself and a few likely branches, but you're ready to follow whichever one they energize. If they surprise you and build a fifth option, it's improv time. You adapt. And yes, sometimes you will use the illusion of choice in a gentle way, not to trick your players, but to keep things moving forward. If they spend 40 minutes debating which of the 3 roads to take, and you know all 3 roads eventually lead to the same city, it's okay to pick a different flavor of encounter on each road, but converge at the same destination. They still had meaningful input about how they got there. The single path sections in my weekly campaign lead them to the next branching section. They're kind of the interludes between the sandboxy types of areas, typically involving major lore drops, BBG encounters, or roleplay opportunities. These single paths have sort of predetermined story beats, but how those play out is dependent on the players. In the path leading up to the 5 branching adventures that we're going up to now, the players chose who to support in the reanimation of a long inanimate statue, incarnate, basically an inanimate magical being, and who they supported, which side they leaned on, determined how good or bad the consequences of the reanimation were. The statue was going to reanimate no matter what. The trick is to be honest with yourself about which choices are cosmetic and which are truly branch points. You honor the big choices, who they ally with, what they sacrifice, who they save, and you feel free to streamline the small ones in the background. That's not bad GMing. That's you managing complexity while still giving the players a sense of agency. I haven't included this in this episode. I guess I am including it now, but as I was doing research for this episode, came across sort of a quote around a DM with regard to story and a sandbox. We hold the million branches of every story in our heads, and they don't take shape until the players reach out and grab one or touch one. We don't hold strong to what ways we actually want to go until our players decide for us. Let's wrap it all together. Let's wrap it up and pull these threads all together. We've talked about 5 big paradoxes of being a DM: prep versus improv, authority and collaboration, rules and story, danger versus safety, and the all-time one, railroads versus sandbox. Now, none of these are problems to solve all at once or even once. They're tensions that you learn to hold. As a DM, you learn to bounce back and forth between them as a way of holding and creating space for your players. So going back through each one, here are the 5 concrete takeaways that you can bring at least one of to your next session. Prep to improvise, not to predict. Focus prep on situations, NPC motives, and reusable toys so you can respond confidently when players surprise you. You own the world, so players can own their story. They can own their legend. Being consistent and authoritative about how the world works while letting player choices reshape the direction of the campaign. Number 3, learn the rules so that you can bend them. Run core procedures fairly, and then flex or compress when it clearly makes the fiction cooler and keeps pacing strong. Make danger real inside safe boundaries. Use session 0 and safety tools so that when you push risk and consequence, everyone knows what they signed up for. And finally, build situations with multiple doors. Design strong situations and likely paths, and then treat your prep as movable tracks rather than a fixed road. That little bit about multiple doors things brings me back to the Matrix, the Keymaster of the Matrix. He opens a door, goes into a long hallway with millions and millions of doors to millions and millions of other doors that you can reach. Think about that when you're starting to prep situations. Now, this is a lot. Remember, you don't have to master every paradox at once or even all of them at a time. If you can pick one that you find strong and experiment with it this month. Notice where you tend to overcorrect and practice living in the middle. Being a dungeon master means living inside these contradictions. You're both author and audience, judge and fan, architect and demolition crew. The more comfortable you get holding those opposites at the same time, the more resilient and creative you become at the table. Next time you feel stuck between 2 pieces of advice, prep more versus prep less, follow the rules versus rule the cool, try asking, what if both are true? And I just need to tune the dial for this group in this moment. That question is where the mastery of paradox lives. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shared Legends podcast. If this episode gives you a new way to think about your own GM style, consider trying one of these paradoxes in your next session and leave a comment with how it went. And as always, if you want more narrative-focused GM tools and ways to create legendary stories, check out the Shared Legends channel and subscribe to bring these ideas back to your own table. To help shape the next episode, which of these paradoxes feels the most live for you right now? Prep versus improv, rules versus story, sandbox versus railroad, or something else entirely? We all know there are more than just these 5 paradoxes that take up space as a DM. Thank you again for listening. This is the Shared Legends podcast, and I am Mike, the GM of Shared Legends.